It will not occur that a wagon and horse team might be employed to supply it with the fuel and water. But this too is expensive, and the question recurs, can the expense be borne? When this is added to all other expenses, will not the plowing cost more than in the old way? It is to be hoped that the steam plow will be finally successful. Then if it shall be, thorough cultivation, putting the soil to the top of its capacity, producing the largest crop possible from a given quantity of ground, will be most favorable to it. Doing a large amount of work upon a small quantity of ground, it will be, as nearly possible, stationary while working, and as free as possible from locomotion, thus expanding its strength as much as possible upon its work, and as little as possible in traveling. Our thanks, and something more substantial than thanks, are due to every man engaged in the effort to produce a successful steam plow. Even the unsuccessful will bring something to light which, in the hands of others, will contribute to the final success. I have not pointed out difficulties in order to discourage, but in order that being seen they may be more readily overcome. The world is agreed that labor is the source from which human wants are mainly supplied. There is no dispute upon this point. From this point, however, men immediately diverge. Much disputation is maintained as to the best way of applying and controlling the labor element. By some, it is assumed that labor is available only in connection with capital, that nobody labors unless somebody else, owning capital somehow, by the use of that capital, induces him to do it. Having assumed this, they proceed to consider whether it best that capital shall hire laborers and thus induce them to work by their own consent, or buy them, and drive them to it without their consent. Having proceeded so far, they naturally conclude that all laborers are necessarily either hired laborers or slaves. They further assume that whoever is once a hired laborer is fatally fixed in that condition for life, and thence again, that his condition is as bad as or worse than that of a slave. This is the mud-sill theory. But another class of reasoners hold the opinion that there is no such relation between capital and labor as assumed, and that there is no such thing as a free man being fatally fixed for life in the condition of a hired laborer, that both these assumptions are false, and all inferences from them groundless. They hold that labor is prior to and independent of capital, that in fact capital is the fruit of labor and could never have existed if labor had not first existed. That labor can exist without capital, but that capital could never have existed without labor. Hence they hold that labor is the superior, greatly the superior of capital. They do not deny that there is, and probably always will be, a relation between labor and capital. The error, as they hold, is in assuming that the whole labor of the world exists within that relation. A few men own capital, and that few avoid labor themselves, and with their capital hire or buy another few to labor for them. A large majority belong to neither class, neither work for others nor have others working for them. Even in all our slave states except South Carolina, a majority of the whole people of all colors are neither slaves nor masters. In these free states, a large majority are neither hirers nor hired. Men with their families, wives, sons, and daughters, work for themselves, on their farms, in their houses, and in their shops, taking the whole product to themselves, and asking no favors of capital on the one hand, nor of hirelings or slaves on the other. It is not forgotten that a considerable number of persons mingle their own labor with capital, that is, labor with their own hands, and also buy slaves or hire free men to labor for them. But this is only a mixed, and not a distinct class. No principle stated is disturbed by the existence of this mixed class. Again, as has already been said, the opponents of the mud-sill theory insist that there is not, of necessity, any such thing as the free hired laborer being fixed to that condition for life. There is demonstration for saying this. Many independent men in this assembly, doubtless a few years ago, were hired laborers, and their case is almost, if not quite, the general rule. The prudent penniless beginner in the world labors for wages a while, saves a surplus with which to buy tools or land for himself, then labors on his own account for another while, and at length hires another new beginner to help him. This, say its advocates, is free labor. The just and generous, the prosperous system, which opens the way for all, gives hope to all, and energy, and progress, and improvement of condition to all. If any continue through life in the condition of the hired laborer, it is not the fault of the system, but because of either a dependent nature which prefers it, or improvidence, folly, or singular misfortune. I have said this much about the elements of labor generally, as introductory to the consideration of a new phrase which that element is in process of assuming. The old general rule was that educated people did not perform manual labor. They managed to eat their bread, leaving the toil of producing it to the uneducated. This was not an insupportable evil to the working bees, so long as the class of drones remained very small. But now, especially in these free states, nearly all are educated, quite too nearly all, to leave the labor of the uneducated in any wise adequate to the support of the whole. It follows from this that henceforth educated people must labor. Otherwise, education itself would become a positive and intolerable evil. No country can sustain, in idleness, more than a small percentage of its numbers. The great majority must labor at something productive. From these premises the problem springs: how can labor and education be most satisfactorily combined? By the mudsill theory, it is assumed that labor and education are incompatible, and any practical combination of them is impossible. According to that theory, a blind horse upon a treadmill is a perfect illustration of what a laborer should be. All the better for being blind that he could not tread out of place or kick understandingly. According to that theory, the education of laborers is not only useless, but pernicious and dangerous. In fact, it is, in some sort, deemed a misfortune that laborers should have heads at all. Those same heads are regarded as explosive materials, only to be safely kept in damp places, as far as possible from that peculiar sort of fire which ignites them. A Yankee who could invent strong-handed man without a head would receive the everlasting gratitude of the mudsill advocates. But free labor says no. Free labor argues that, as the author of Man makes every individual with one head and one pair of hands, it was probably intended that the heads and hands would cooperate as friends, and that that particular head should direct and control that particular pair of hands. As each man has one mouth to be fed, and one pair of hands to furnish food, it was probably intended that that particular pair of hands should feed that particular mouth. That each head is the natural guardian, director, and protector of the hands and mouth, inseparably connected with it. And that being so, every head should be cultivated and improved by whatever will add to its capacity for performing its charge. In one word, free labor insists on universal education. I have so far stated the opposite theories of mudsill and free labor without declaring any preference of my own between them. On an occasion like this, I ought not to declare any. I suppose, however, I shall not be mistaken in assuming as a fact that the people of Wisconsin prefer free labor with its natural companion, education. This leads to the further reflection that no other human occupation opens so wide a field for the profitable and agreeable combination of labor with cultivated thought as agriculture. I know of nothing so pleasant to the mind as the discovery of anything which is at once new and available, nothing which so lightens and sweetens toil as the hopeful pursuit of such discovery. And how vast and how varied a field is agriculture for such discovery. The mind already trained to thought in the country school or higher school cannot fail to find there an exhaustless source of profitable enjoyment. Every blade of grass is a study, and to produce two where there was but one is both a profit and a pleasure. And not grass alone, but soils, seeds, and seasons, hedges, ditches, and fences, draining, droughts, and irrigation, plowing, hoeing, and harrowing, reaping, mowing, and threshing, saving crops, pests of crops, diseases of crops, and what will prevent or cure them, implements, utensils, and machines, their relative merits and how to improve them, hogs, horses, and cattle, sheep, goats, and poultry, trees, shrubs, fruits, plants, and flowers, the thousand things of which there are specimens, each a world of study within itself. In all this, book learning is available. A capacity and taste for reading gives access to whatever has already been discovered by others. It is the key, or one of the keys, to the already solved problems. And not only so, it gives a relish and facility for successfully pursuing the yet unsolved ones. The rudiments of science are available, and highly valuable. Some knowledge of botany assists in dealing with the vegetable world, with all growing crops. Chemistry assists in the analysis of soils, selection and application of manures, and in numerous other ways. The mechanical branches of natural philosophy are a ready help in almost everything, but especially in reference to implements and machinery. The thought recurs that education, cultivated thought, can best be combined with agricultural labor, or any labor on the principle of thorough work. That careless, half-performed, slovenly work makes no place for such combination. And thorough work, again, renders sufficient the smallest quantity of ground to each man. And this again conforms to what must occur in a world less inclined to wars, and more devoted to the arts of peace, than heretofore. Population must increase rapidly, more rapidly than in former times, and ere long the most valuable of all arts will be the art of deriving a comfortable subsistence from the smallest area of soil. No community whose every member possesses this art can ever be the victim of oppression of any of its forms. Such community will be alike independent of crown kings, money kings, and land kings. But according to your program, the awarding of premiums awaits the closing of this address. Considering the deep interest necessarily pertaining to that performance, it would be no wonder if I am already heard with some impatience. I will detain you but a moment longer. Some of you will be successful, and such will need but little philosophy to take them home in cheerful spirits. Others will be disappointed, and will be in a less happy mood. To such, let it be said, lay it not too much to heart, let them adopt the maxim, better luck next time, and then, by renewed exertion, make that better luck for themselves. And by the successful and the unsuccessful, let it be remembered, that while occasions like the present bring their sober and durable benefits, the exultations and mortifications of them are but temporary, that the victor shall soon be the vanquished, if he relax in his exertion, and that the vanquished this year may be victor the next, in spite of all competition. It is said an Eastern monarch once charged his wise men to invent him a sentence, to be ever in view, and which should be true and appropriate in all times and situations. They presented him with the words, "And this too shall pass away." How much it expresses! How chastening in the hour of pride, and how consoling in the depths of affliction! And this too shall pass away, and yet let us hope it is not quite true. Let us hope, rather, that by the best cultivation of the physical world beneath and around us, and the intellectual and moral world within us, we shall secure an individual social and political prosperity and happiness, whose course shall be onward and upward, and which, while the earth endures, shall not pass away.